All right. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Heading to the second week of December. Hope all your forecasting is going well. Welcome to DoorDash Finance Fridays. Every week I chat with an amazing finance professional. And today I am excited to host Mike Kim from DoorDash. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Rose. Hello, everyone. Just to give a little update on Rose's introduction, I actually am no longer the VP of Finance at DoorDash. My last day was last Friday. After six
Oh, wow.
plus years, I decided to, take a little break. Actually, the first time in almost 30 years since I started working. So, putting a little focus on my family and personal life a little bit, but still, first time in almost 2 decades that I didn't have to think about financial planning. But I'm excited to talk about, how, what the next year looks like in this pretty challenging environment. So thanks for having me, Rose.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Great to have you here, Mike. There's so much to dig into, and we have a limited time, just like all finance people, limited resources, so much to do. Um, in the first minute or two, I'd love to just go back. You've had such an amazing career in tech finance, but you actually got it. You started out more in the banking side and not in a company. So we'd love to just hear that journey and going in-house
Yeah,
afterwards.
looking back, you always want to think that you had this master plan, but really, I started my career in banking because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I
Hmm.
started in, banking before the dot-com bubble or the dot-com craziness back in
Yeah.
late 90s. And then, I lived through that, that whirlwind times. And I also did some management consulting where I got to travel the world and look at how different businesses, operated in not only in
Yep.
US, but in the Middle East and in Asia. So that great experience. And really not until I got to, Salesforce, I kind of figured out what I wanted to do with my career. And, that's been, an incredible journey. And, I always trusted that, you know, s- you know, uh, things will work out if you put in the work. But when I graduated back in from Berkeley back in late 90s, this is not what I thought my career would be, but learned a ton. And more related with Sadozi, I never really sought out to manage anything with procurement or sourcing. It's one of those areas where I was given the responsibility because I was in finance, but I learned a ton, and I'm happy to share some of my experience with the group here.
Awesome. Thank you for that. You land at Salesforce. It's still relatively early days. I'm sure standing up all sorts of processes, all sorts of data structures. Share a little bit about what it was like. Were there already sort of departmental or business unit P&Ls when you got there? If there were, what did you do with them, and where was the company in that sort of reporting and budget management phase?
Yeah, when I joined Salesforce, this was back in 2011 or so. So the company was still very young, um, but I was still a noob in, call it, corporate finance. I mean, I knew how to build a model, understand P&L, and do planning. But that was the very first time I was introduced to the concept of annual planning or systems
Hmm.
like Space, or I think
Hmm.
Coupa was recently rolled out at the time. And there were all these processes that were new to me, but so I was learning at the same time, trying to understand the whys behind these processes.
With these, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think similarly to some of the more recent experience, Salesforce at the time was going through what I would call a pretty incredible growth spurt. Salesforce was the very first SaaS company, I believe, or the fastest to hit 5 billion in revenue. and they were, ripping at the seams. So having established processes was somewhat of a moving target. There was a pretty sizable sourcing team. There was a lot of spend on infrastructure and R&D, which is where I focused on. But I would say global sourcing team, there was about 40 to 50 people at the time already, and an established process of POs that had to be followed. So pretty restrictive at that time. So, and what I realized after was that Salesforce was actually quite unique in having a very set process. I thought it was like that everywhere, but I found that it's actually, they were one of the companies that I learned how to set up the right structure of balancing control at the same time, allowing a company to grow fast. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a great learning environment for me to kind of replicate in other places I landed afterwards.
So I'm going to make a guess that when you went to Square, there was no PO system, or at least no formal PO system rigorously used.
There was not. And I think I joined Square when we were around 200 employees. And, one of the first thing I learned how people spent money was it was a hallway conversation with Jack Dorsey, right? And because there was no process for issuing a PO or a purchase requisition,
approval, anything.
No approval was,
verbal.
Their manager or somebody said, "Yeah, let's go do that." And people used their own credit cards, and and got it reimbursed. Sometimes when they sign up for SaaS, it was even tough because they would commit to a year, 2 year, and the employee, if the employee departs the company, you'll still get invoices.
Right.
So it was what I would call kind of like the wild, wild west. Maybe not as bad as maybe the recent FTX fiasco of approving expense reports over text. But yeah, it was one of those things where it was a very common thing to see in early stage startups where you rely on the decision making of the employee to spend money.
Yeah. And as you saw this happening and you're like, oh, well, this is very different from the more structured PO system we had at Salesforce, what were some of the ways that you successfully introduced, I would say, policies that still enabled growth for the business?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, buyers, or what we would traditionally call buyers in a startup environment, see things like a procurement process or P2P or getting approvals. They see that as a pretty painful red tape that slows them down. And I think if you go in guns blazing and saying, hey, here's a new policy we're going to implement, here's a new process you have to follow, you're going to get a lot of pushback, especially from those that feel like, look, whether it's on the tech side or on the sales and marketing side, they're going to look, I want to focus on my core responsibilities. I don't want to deal with this process. So it does take a little bit of evolution of what I found to be effective is you definitely want to make it as light touch as possible and really explain why certain things need to get done. I think one of the key things that I always found it to be convincing, as an example, was, Series C, Series D startup companies, you have really hardworking teammates, but they're incentivized by the hope of a financial outcome that's favorable.
Right. Right.
Everyone's a shareholder early days. So, from the finance lens, you had to explain to them, hey, in order for us to go public, in order for us to be financially compliant, we need to be able to have transparency and visibility to where we spend the money, how much liabilities there are, why contracts need to exist. So once you connect those dots to say this isn't to slow you down, this is to make sure that we have good hygiene in order to close our books accurately on a monthly, quarterly basis, and be compliant, and be getting ready to be in the public
Yep.
stage. i
Right.
think i
Right.
think people tend to understand that connection. So obviously, a bit painful in the beginning, but having educating your partners to understand the why really helped
Yep.
with the process.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think you brought up the technology example. It's like no product team, no engineering team would spend 100% of their time on features, right? You've got to invest in some of the infrastructure to help the team and the company scale. And I think you mentioned like the lightweight approval processes, something that's reasonable but also gets the job done. Getting that inserted, definitely, earlier stage, before even before the the D rounds and things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
even early days of DoorDash, when we had Coupa in place, and I had a report pulled up early days to look at our master vendor list, and half of the master vendors were employees. Because they were, similarly to Square, they were
Reimbursements, yeah.
employees were using their own credit cards to pay. So, it took a lot of early cleanups to kind of centralize some of the hodgepodge of software that was, put on personal cards. But, I think this is why it's kind of important if you're an early stage startup to not commingle expense T&E, like your employee T&E and expenses, with purchasing.
Yep.
I think that's kind of important, because once you kind of get in the habit of paying employees for these things that are not like travel and personal expenses,
Lunch.
you
Yeah.
yeah you have a lot of future debt that you have to clean up.
Yeah. So, speaking of DoorDash, getting there early on, was it a similar experience to being at around 200 employees with Square, or what, how different of those experiences was that for you in the finance team?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of similarities of early stage, call it sub 500 employee culture. And I'm sure, Rose, you're kind of living through that right now. There's a certain level of what I would call excitement, energy, but also kind of naivete around how more mature companies operate. So it's kind of, there's pros and cons. And I would say there was a lot of similarities between Square and DoorDash, kind of like 3 to 4 years apart. I also saw a lot of what I would call qualities that I really liked about Square showing up in DoorDash, because Tony was also an ex Square. He was a product manager there before he left to do his MBA at Stanford. So I saw some of the DNA that he brought with him.
Hmm.
There was a lot of energy, and what I think, the quality, the cultural quality that I loved the most when I first started at DoorDash was this level of scrappiness of trying to do more with less, whether it's money or capital or less, people. It was just that can-do attitude. Some of it was,
Hmm.
maybe, naiveness that kind of came through, but also at the same time, it was one of those times where you just didn't have a lot of capital, so you had to figure out efficient, cost-effective ways to operate. because our cash run rate wasn't very healthy at the time. A lot of people don't realize back in 2017 when I joined, I think we at its lowest, I think we may had like a 4-month cash runway.
Wow.
Before our Series D came through. So it was kind of an uncertain time, and you had to tighten your belt in order to survive. And I can see a lot of private companies over the next 12 to 24 months, having to do that. If they're doing it already, if that's, exhibiting that behavior already, great. Otherwise, you're not going to be faced with, easily available capital to raise in the private market. So,
Yeah. Yeah, transitioning to that, if you were at, let's say, 200 to 500 employee company again, knowing what the markets are going to be like next year and the uncertainty in general, what are some of the things that you think should be in place, and what could be, helpful for our finance audience speaking with their business partners as well in terms of like things that they can package up and tell their business partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I step back and think about the mistakes I made in the past,
No
and
mistakes, Mike. You know, like
yeah. Well, no, it's like I think they're all valuable because I think I learned from it, and when I think about sourcing and procurement, and I was also on the customer side, right? I was also on the buyer side dealing
yep,
with
yep,
having to be required to use a certain process, get certain approvals. So, I always thought about that function as a bureaucratic, call it, process where it's just like it was something that I needed to, I was required to do. And I think one of the things that I learned is that that function, along with partnerships with the buyer, can be an incredible point of leverage, especially if there's ways where you can save significant amount of money.
yeah,
And when you're talking about, initially maybe a couple million or 10 million, but once that scales, I'll use example vendors like, CRM, Salesforce. I had to negotiate for DoorDash, when it came to Salesforce contracts, or whether it's Stripe or PayPal or any payment processing, or large infrastructure or spend like AWS. I'm sure a lot of the finance folks deal with AWS spend. When you have a capable team and a process that ensures that you are spending no more than what you should, that savings that you get can be funneled right back into the growth of the company. So
right.
a lot of people think, oh, you guys are just, control and compliance focused. No, I think if you have an effective, procurement team, along with their finance partners that educate their buyers on why you need to go get multiple bids.
Right.
I don't see that any difference in your personal life. If you're gonna spend money on doing your home remodel, you're not gonna just go with one
The first
bid.
contractor.
You're
Yeah.
gonna do due diligence and figure out what are the requirements, who's best to serve those requirements, who's going to do it in the most optimal service level and pricing. So I think if I were to kind of go back, I would have kind of had a change of thought about how to leverage that process to be more effective in generating what I would call generating additional room, especially during planning.
Right.
During
Right.
planning, I'm sure a lot of the finance folks here would be pressured to say, hey, everybody wants more. Nobody gives up budget, right? Everybody wants more. They
Yeah.
want to do this project. They want to invest here. One of the ways where you can find room is to look at, well, what are we spending that we don't need to spend? I guarantee there's, no matter what size of the company, there's redundancies on, spend areas. We, Salesforce, at Square, at DoorDash, we've had, just going through an audit of, what we use, you found multiple redundant, vendors. And then there were, contracts that would auto renew, and no one was looking at it to negotiate.
Yep. There's no owner there.
Yeah.
Who's the owner?
One of those
Yeah.
things where like you're constantly getting billed, but no one is even looking at the bill, right? And accounting and accounts payable, they just process, right? No buyer is saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't have 4,000 seats here. Why are we being charged this much, right? So there's I would say a whole set of things that early companies start getting in the habit of, going through this process, and it, generates additional funds for investment.
Totally. Yeah, especially if you're still using the product, but maybe you need fewer seats. You can save that chunk of money and invest it into your growth. No, super amazing wisdom here, Mike. All right, wrapping up on a little bit more of a light note. Plug for any favorite product, things that you'll be doing with some of your downtime coming up. What's on your mind there?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that I really enjoyed my 6 years at DoorDash, especially my teammates, and just kind of being in the trenches early days, and making lifelong friends, and obviously seeing the success of the company has been really rewarding. Now that I'm no longer employee, I don't know if they're going to take away my Dash Pass subscription. But one thing that I'm really proud of is actually when the finance team was the one that kind of incubated the concept of monthly subscriptions. So it was kind of a pet project that our team started.
Awesome.
Yeah, initially it wasn't something that the company kind of was very excited about. It was actually met with a lot of skepticism, because early days we would lose a lot of money to a Dash Pass subscriber. So I think that's the one that I'm constantly looking for the company to enhance its services. Now, obviously, you can get, besides core food delivery, you can get it for convenience, you can get it for groceries. It'll dramatically reduce the cost. And similarly to what we've been talking about, when you think about affordability of habituation behaviors like ordering food or ordering groceries, it's actually, if you subscribe to Dash Pass, it's actually pretty significant in terms of savings. So I hope that continues to get traction. I'm also somewhat biased because I coined the word or the service Dash Pass. So
wow,
it's going to outlive me, hopefully, in terms of if it
your legacy
continues to be successful. So I'm excited about the company's potential. I think right now, in this environment, people can feel pretty discouraged about, obviously, public company stock prices and things like that in the more macro setting. But I kind of lived through this. This is like really my third kind of wave of market, call it collapse. I saw that after the .com, saw that in the financial crisis, and even as we go through it right now. I've been kind of sharing my perspective with a lot of folks. These businesses have cycles, and for 15 years, we've been living off of this sugar of 0% interest rate, easy capital, growth at all costs. I think it's going to be really important for companies to, not so focus on growth at all cost. You have to really think about, where you're spending your resources, smartly, because the ones that do are the ones that are going to, one, survive, and two, thrive when things do improve, because you now have the muscle memory to spend money and spend resources in an efficient way. So I am, just like Square and Salesforce and DoorDash, I will continue to be a big fan, but as a shareholder, not necessarily in the trenches in the working team. But I have no doubt that long run they'll be successful.
Amazing, Mike. Thank you so much for your time here today. There are going to be so many notes I want to jot down for other people to take away and help implement better processes and really find those dollars for investment within their current vendor stack or where they're spending money today. Thank you, and have a great.
No, I just wanted to say, Rose, thank you for having
me.
I'm actually really excited for Sudozi, because I think you guys are trying to find this right balanced solution of a product and a tool that will allow people to have transparency and really a light touch way to make sure that companies can leverage the requirements that really hasn't been improved in a couple of decades. So I'm excited for you and Sudozi. So thanks for having me again.
Oh, thanks, Mike. All right, have a good one, everyone. See you next week.
Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.